And that was a movie. That's it. And then for a variety of reasons, when you get to the late first decade of the late part of the first decade of the 20th century and then beyond that, they started adding reels. One of the big problems they had was, or the challenges they had was, how do you get the middle class into the movies? Because it was really a working class type of entertainment. And the middle class was watching stage plays. And the stage plays were an hour and a half to 3 hours. And they tried adapting stage plays to the movies, but it becomes the Monarch Notes edition. You know, it becomes one actor doing a bunch of highlights from Shakespeare. And it wasn't the same thing. It was like Twelfth Night and 1 minute per night, you know? That's all you got. So they started adding the reels. Because it's actually the first example of supersizing. Because they were charging a nickel for the little movie, but they figured we'll get 50 cents if we get the middle class in, and we'll do a much better business. And that's what they did, and it worked. So, but the problem is that when you start adding reels to the early movies, they only have one projector. And you got to stop the movie in order to swap out the reels. And so the other problem was that often these early features were not distributed all at once. You would get, like a serial, you would get 1 or 2 reels a week, and you got to come back to the theater to watch the rest. So there came to be a consciousness of writing by the reel. You're going to write, the end of the first reel has to have a fade out at the end, and then the second reel has a fade in on the second one, and it has to have a coherent story, and some early screenwriting manuals instructed the people the writers, aspiring writers, to write for the reels. So it carries on. If you've looked at, by the 1920s, you'll see that you don't have this problem with the projectors anymore, but you still have a persistence of this. And if you read screenplays that date before 1950, you'll see a legacy of that early practice is in the sequence letters that are in the screenplays. They're listed by sequence A, B, C, D, etc. So it still persisted, and if you look at movies today, they haven't been written explicitly by sequences except in rare cases today. But if you study them, you'll see that there is a persistence of the pattern. And the persistence probably has more to do with human physiology and attention than it does to do with the history, because most people don't know the history. But it is something that persists if you study it, and that's something that we'll do in a little bit. Historically, it was revived by my mentor at Columbia when I was studying there, Frank Daniel. He found the problem was that students were having trouble with that second act. It's 60 pages. How do you deal with 60 pages? It's intimidating. And if you think about it in terms of, instead of 60 pages, it's 15 pages, you're better off. It's a useful tool in that sense. So this is something that allows you to overcome what's called the second act morass. However, there is more to it than that, because artistically, there's a lot to be gained by it. The way it works overall is you have really what's called a fractal in geometry, an iterated pattern at different levels. You have the acts, the overall acts, then you have the sequences, and usually the way it works is you have 2 in the first act, 4 in the second, and 2 in the third. You usually run about 15 minutes. This is the paradigm. This is the overall thing. 15 minutes for each one. 2 in the first, 4 in the second, 2 in the third. And then within that, of course, you have individual scenes. And it's an iterated structure because within the scenes themselves, it's useful to think in terms of 3 acts. And I tell you, it's a secret for making your script flow, is that tackle it based on whose scene is it, and what do they want, and what are the obstacles. It may sound cumbersome, but it does work. If you solve it that way, you enrich the script, you make it more interesting, and you make it very readable. And people will be turning the pages, and they won't know what the heck you're doing. And they don't know why it's reading so well. But you'll know why, because you came here, and you tried it. And so I urge you to try this. So you have this nested structure that makes things flow. Now, there are other things besides the usefulness of managing 15-page bits of script that help you when you think in terms of sequences. One first impression you may have is that, oh my God, it's another formula. And now I'm going to sit there and I'm going to just plug in this Okay, what's sequence 3 going to be, and 4, and all that? And if you use it that way, it'll be deadly, and it'll ruin everything you do. But if you look at it instead as a way of challenging yourself to push the premise that you have to the limit. One problem that I encounter with students is they get an interesting premise, a great what if, and then for 60 pages, it's just all the same stuff. And they don't push it enough. And if you challenge yourself to push the material in different ways and explore it in different variations, you write better scripts, and they'll be more interesting. Now, the way it works is typically to lay out a classic paradigm is first sequence is about getting the audience oriented, who, what, when, where, under what conditions is this happening. So it is what's called exposition. We don't have, in ancient Greek theater, you had a character named Prologue. Prologue gets up and he tells you everything you need to know. And we've learned how to smuggle our exposition in over the last couple thousand years. But that's what you do in the beginning. You capture a character in the flow of life. This is another issue to be aware of, that a mistake is made sometimes when people think, I gotta get the story going right away. Nobody wants to read exposition. I gotta get the story going. The problem with that is, there's a couple of problems. One is, you don't have a narrator in drama. You gotta rely on the audience has to witness the action. If you don't have some kind of setup, the audience isn't gonna know what the story is, or when the story starts. The story really doesn't start until the second act. The first act tells you what the story is gonna be about. And if you try to start the story right away, then you're not gonna orient the audience as to what the reality of your world is, and they'll just be confused. The other problem is that you don't have enough introductory material on which you can build later, so you can run out of ideas in the second act. But the problem, the question of, get the story started right away is solved here because you can get a story started right away. It's just a 15-minute story. It doesn't have to be the big story. It's just the first one. The first one that teases the audience in because they want to know what happens. And they'll give you that first couple pages. And then you build from there to the next to the next. So typically, the first act, the first sequence, is about getting us oriented, capturing a character in the flow of life so that we know what the normal is. So when the abnormal comes, and that's the story, we'll know it. We'll know that the story is starting. That's how it works. Okay, now the thing to avoid is putting us with too much information immediately. Typically, successful movies and screenplays will start with some kind of puzzle. And that's what I mean, raise an question in the audience's mind when you begin. Put a puzzle there and make us curious. What is that? And don't tell us right away. We'll turn the page and find out. We get oriented. By now, you're getting into some kind of interesting situation, and the character wants something. And then you're into the sequence, and then you've got them for 15 pages, and now you're in. So the job of that first sequence is about getting us in the flow of life, getting us introduced to what the character's hopes, dreams, fears, aspirations, and doing it in an interesting way with an interesting little story. And also, by the way, you can create empathy and sympathy for your character in the beginning. The secret of doing that is give them some little task that they have to do, and then see if they can do it. And the audience will eventually get on their side because they're going to want to see if they can succeed. And it all can take place in just the very beginning. And if it sounds a little vague, I'll get a very specific examples for you, a couple of specific examples in just a little bit. At the end of the first sequence, there's usually something that intrudes in the flow of life. And it's called the point of attack, the attack. These are playwriting terms. I think you might have heard inciting incident. That'll qualify. But the idea is you got the flow of life. Something intrudes on the flow of life. Character's got to do something with it, about it. And that second sequence is the doing something about it. Character's going to deal with it somehow. And that's it, But it doesn't quite go the way they expect, so you wind up at the end of the first act after the first sequence, after the second sequence. And then you're the predicament. The character, we know who the character is, we know what they want, we have a sense of what the obstacles are going to be, and now you're off. Now the story starts. Third sequence is usually, the tension in it is identical to the main tension of the movie, the main question. Because another thing to keep in mind is that the characters don't know what the story's about. See, you may think, well, I got to cover 60 pages now, so the character is going to have to amble their way through the story. And it doesn't work that way. The character doesn't know it's going to be 60 pages. The character thinks it's going to be done in 15. And that's how you play it. Solve the problem for the character in the first 15 minutes. It's over. And the movie's done. Except that you have the power, being God, you know, over your created characters, you can put up little obstacles and introduce problems for them. And after about 15 minutes, there you go. Now something worse has come up. And then you build to the next one. You have some new problem. And again, challenge yourself. What are the different ways you can look at the premise that you've created and all the different ways that the character can try to solve it? And usually in the midpoint, you get a glimpse of the ending. Either it's a mirror image of the ending or the identical to the ending. The high point, low point can be different things. But it's a possible glimpse. So that happens right in the middle. Then the next sequence, the third sequence of the second act, will be a consequence of that midpoint. Again, oftentimes if you have subplot characters, you will see that they come into play. Sometimes you'll see a whole sequence is about a subplot character at that point. Then the last sequence of the second act is typically the most desperate one, you know, in the second act. And then, but not always, then the end of that sequence is the end of the second act. You get the answer to the question. And then the last two sequences, the consequence of that. That's the paradigm. How many people have heard of the term, of the notion rising action? Okay. It's very simple. There's two simple reasons why the problems tend to escalate in a successful drama. One has to do with human nature. As I say, if a character has a problem at the end of this first act, they're going to do the most easy thing that comes to them. That first sequence is the easy way to solve it. When that doesn't work because you're very skillful writers now and you know that it can't work because you've got to have a full-length script, then they try the next thing. And then they try the next thing. And then each one, it gets worse and worse. Until they get to the end and they got to try the one they really didn't want to do, and now you get the answer. That's the human nature one. The other has to do with human physiology, how we respond to stimulus. That we need it in escalating in increments. How many people have been to a firework display? Same structure all the time. Start with one, but he's thrilled. Then you start with another one. Then you go two, whoa, it's interesting. And then you get a couple more, and a few more, and you build and build and build. And then finally they have a little pause, and maybe they do a pinwheel, you know, or they do the American flag, you've seen that stuff. And then they throw everything up, and then you're done. Imagine if you went to a fireworks display, and they started with everything at the beginning, and then gradually worked their way down until there was just one. You'd probably have a riot. I'm absolutely convinced it's never been tried. How many people have been to a striptease? Okay, let the record show nobody has been to a striptease here. I've certainly never been to one, but I heard about them. And the person doesn't start with the clothes off and then gradually put them on. It's a tease. You tease the audience and gradually increase the intellectual content until you're done. So that's part of that plays into this, and that's why you'll see this, the tendency to increase the excitement as the story goes. Another thing, how many people have been to a movie? You're getting bombarded by questions. You probably thought you'd ask me questions, but I need to ask you some stuff too here. How many people have been to a movie that they felt was contrived? I think most of us have had this experience. Well, let me tell you something. Every movie's contrived. They're all contrived. There's no chance in a movie. Somebody made a decision and they put it down there, they rehearsed the scene, and they did it that way. Why is it that some movies feel contrived? And let me tell you, if it feels contrived, it doesn't work. The reason is that the storyteller is not exploring enough possibilities in it. You get a one-trick pony kind of script where it's just, there's only one result and it's obvious and it goes there. If you discipline yourself and challenge yourself to explore your premise in a multiple number of ways in sequence, you can actually present the audience with multiple endings so that when you get to the ending, it feels complete. It feels like I've seen it all, and this is the only way it could have gone. And it went that way. So you'll see, character thinks it's solved at the end of the first sequence. It isn't. They think it's solved here, here. You have positive, negative, up, down. End of the second act, people typically think, well, the end of the second act must be the low point. And that limits you if you think that way, often but not always. It's really just a glimpse of an ending. And sometimes it's what the character really wants, and they get it. And then it turns out it's not what they thought it was going to be. And then you explore the premise reversed. The whole movie's been about a guy wanting something, and then the third act is the guy has the thing, now what? So you really get 2 movies for the price of 1. And you get to see different ways of seeing the premise, and it gets stretched and pushed. And then by the end of it, you are, when you finally get to the resolution, you say, yeah, I've seen it. I've seen it all. That's it. It couldn't have gone any other way. How many people have seen Toy Story? Okay, good. If you have children, you've seen it, and you've maybe seen it many times. This is a really good movie. It's managed to bridge, you know, it managed to pull in the generations, the children and the adults. It's something for everybody. And it's one of the best screenplays you can read and you can watch. And if you're, what I'm going to do typically here, I would show you some clips. I can't do that here, but I'm going to walk you through it. If you're watching at home, feel free to take the DVD out and put the DVD for Toy Story in. I won't be offended. And watch this. And when you study really well-done movies, it's helpful. I mean, it's better actually to watch one movie 5 times than it is to watch 5 movies 1 time. Because each time you're going to pick up more stuff. And if it's really well-done stuff, you get to find out. Think of it like this. When you study a film by a master, you are learning from a master. The masters are the only ones who really know how to teach this because they did it. So when you look at a film very carefully, you are basically going into the kitchen of the master chef, finding out how they cook this stuff up. First time, it's just viewer. Second time, you're starting to discern things. Third, fourth, fifth time, you start to see how it all fits. So it's worthwhile studying this movie. You may recall, it begins with a cloud in the sky. Typically, movies start with an exterior long shot. Because, and I've seen this, I've seen so many scripts where students write the script and it begins with a medium shot of interior of people yakking or something. It's not interesting. You try to pose a puzzle somehow. And usually you start with an exterior because we want to know where we are. And this one is a kind of, it does a little trick on you. It starts out with a cloudy sky, and then you realize the clouds are part of the wallpaper, and you're in the kid's bedroom. And you see this kid playing with his toys, but you don't see the kid. You start out right in the middle of it. You're in the flow of life. You're not given any information. There's no exposition. It's just a kid playing, and you're intrigued because you don't know any more than that. It's a puzzle. So it pulls you in with that. Okay, you get in the title sequence the first telegraphing. And I've said telegraphing is often lines of dialogue, but sometimes it's visual. You might have a guy getting ready, preparing a motorcycle and fixing it up and putting fuel in is signaling to the audience he's going for a ride. You might have someone picking out a wedding dress. They're going to get, somebody's getting married, it's coming. This is an example of the decorations. If it says, "Happy birthday, Andy," there's probably a birthday party coming. And the kid says, "Can we keep the stuff up until, all week until we move?" So the move is there. We're already looking into the future. There's a party coming. Preparations are being made. And we're already dealing with elements of the future. Okay? We've also had a bit of a solution to the puzzle of the playing of the toys because we get to know the kid and the mom. You get a little more oriented. End of the title sequence is when the magic starts. That's when the movie proper begins. In effect, the title sequence is a prologue. It's not necessary to put where you want the titles in your screenplays, but it's useful in this case to look at that and see what the artistic choice is. That you have normal world in the beginning, and then after a certain point, magic. Now we're going to start learning about this world. The toy comes to life, and you get the first dangling cause. We got trouble. And you notice that the storyteller doesn't tell you what the trouble is. The trouble is that a birthday party is a source of anxiety for the toys because they think they're going to be replaced. That's what the trouble is. But the character doesn't say, "We're in trouble, the toys are going to be worried because of the birthday party." He just says, "We got trouble." And now it's a puzzle. What trouble? What is it? I want to turn the page because I want to see what the trouble is. And they tease you. He teases you for about 2-3 minutes about this. He talks to people, he says, gather them around, and there's some suspense built up around what this trouble is. During the process in which he's calling the meeting, you get very clever exposition. The character is establishing patterns of behavior. There's a checkers board. There's the quick draw by the guy named Sketch. There's the attempt by the dinosaur to scare him. All these suggest, they introduce characters, but they do more than that. They give us a hint of a whole life that exists before the movie started. And that's important too. Don't overlook that. The movie just, it only exists on screen. And what you got in the screenplay is only on the screenplay. There's no hot link, hypertext link that's going to tell you anything else. It's just there. There's no further reality. But as your task as a screenwriter to make us think there is a reality. And the way you do that is by implying it. And when a guy pushes a checkers board out and says, okay, you want to be black or white this time, well, it tells you more than that he wants to play checkers. It tells you they do this. They do this a lot. And then at the same time, there's something wrong. It's very rich storytelling. Then you get to the speech, and that's where you get the explanation of the trouble. And then the trouble is all about, yeah, there's a problem with the birthday party moved up an extra week. Now, in the process here, there is a dramatic scene that's created. Character wants something, and there's obstacles. What Woody wants to do is calm down the toys. And he launches into this big argument about, it's not about us, it's about what the boy wants, it's about Andy, we shouldn't worry, I'm not worried, you shouldn't be worried. So while he's smuggling the information in, he's giving information to the audience about what is the issue. And we don't know we're getting the information. The other thing that's clever about this movie is that, I have here the term raisonneur. A raisonneur is often, it's a character, a minor character, not the main one, that carries the theme of the movie, that knows the truth that the character doesn't see and can echo it. Like, you shouldn't be doing this, you're going to hell for this, this kind of character that's telling them, you've got to be at peace with yourself, get into therapy, do something, get help. That's the raisonneur. Once in a while, you'll see that the main character can be the raisonneur. It's, in this case, Woody explains the truth that you got to relax, it's all about the kid, it's not about us, accept it. And then, when the movie continues, he himself doesn't accept it and doesn't see it for himself. So the movie, the theme, the main character is often the one that carries the theme. It's this truth that the character doesn't see until he goes through the action. The theme is, let go. You can't will love. You can't make somebody love you. And he knows it. He just doesn't know it applies to him. So he knows the truth. Now we know what the issue is. And he says it himself. So we learn about that. Okay. Now in that, you have the establishment of the tension of the first sequence. He calls in the troops and he says, if I call in the troops, will you all calm down? So we know it's Woody's sequence. What does he want? He wants to calm them down. That's what he's been doing since he started. So the target of his desire is calming down everybody. And everything he does is aimed at that. So it's structured like a little drama. And the implied question is he going to calm them down or not? And it's really carefully done. They don't call out the troops just for the fun of it because it's a fun scene. It's really justified. It's only because there's no other choice. And then you get the fun. So it has that real reality to it. The troops provide us with the first real example of dramatic irony in the movie, because they're hustling around, but it's in secret. And the moment the mom comes in, you may remember, she comes in, all the troops are told, freeze, in their action positions. The mom comes in and accidentally steps on one and then kicks them aside. We've learned something. We've learned that humans don't know about this stuff. And that's important. We're learning the rules of this world. So, and now you know that if there's, the humans might find out there's tension. And it happens. The ball bounces by, the troops are hurrying to get out of the way before the kids come. So you got that opportunity there. Okay, now in the process of opening the toys, you get the apparent resolution of the sequence. The last prize, the last gift that the kid gets is this battleship game. And it's not a threat to anybody. So Woody was right, everybody relaxes, it's over, and the movie's over. And that's how they played it. And you'll see, you watch it, and you'll see that there's a careful attempt to make us convinced it's over. And it was just a short after all. It isn't a feature film. And then, what do? Suddenly, oh, I've got one more. And it turns out that it's Buzz. And you don't even learn it's buzz. They tease you.